Yeah, that's exactly right. And going back to our example of a small business owner or rancher or just anybody that's in business in general, if they have a fleet of vehicles and half of them are electric and they need to charge a portion of them during the day, but they need to be up and running during the night, but it's like, oh, sorry, the charging period takes 12 hours. That's just not feasible. And what's happening with the general automotive industry right now is they're still making profits off of the vehicles with the internal combustion engine, while at the same time making massive losses on their electric segment. And so when the consumer looks at these different things, the consumer is the smartest person in the room when it comes to what they need. They know exactly how far they need to go, what kind of vehicle they need. And the choices with the internal combustion engine and traditional energy is that if you need a small vehicle, there's one there for you. They will get 40 to 50 miles per gallon. If you need a full-size truck,
Americans are capable of achieving extraordinary things when they have the freedom and opportunity to do so. This is American Potential. And here's your host, Jeff Crank.
Well, thanks for being with us for another episode of American Potential. You know, gas-powered vehicles, they're the backbone of how 300 million Americans choose to get around. Some use their vehicles to get to work, which could be an hour or more each way, or take family vacations around the country. Others use their vehicles for ranching, farming, construction, or other rugged purposes. The convenience of pulling into a gas station, filling up in under 5 minutes and hitting the road for another 300 miles or so is something many people rely on. Now, 3 million Americans choose to use electric vehicles because they may have a short commute around town with access to charging stations. Now, whether it's gas or electric, these vehicles are options for consumers, and automakers build what people want because of market demand. So if that's the case, why is the government stepping in and removing choices from the market? Why should bureaucrats in Washington decide what kind of car or truck that rancher or construction worker needs? Because they've never ranched or worked in construction, they don't have any idea what the individual needs are of these consumers. Now, new light-duty and medium-duty vehicle standards implemented by the Biden-Harris administration will go into effect in 2027, and it'll affect how Americans can get around. I want to welcome Matt Keenan, who is a Federal Affairs Liaison for Americans for Prosperity. Matt, thanks for being with us.
hey, Jeff, thanks for having me on your show and really appreciate the opportunity to speak about this very important issue the Biden-Harris administration is rolling out.
Yeah, it's about taking away choices. We'll get into all of that. But first of all, let's talk about taking things away, because you are in Alaska and you're going to go fishing on the Kenai River, as I understand it. And, you know, those are my fish, Matt. You know, I go up there every year and I catch lots of salmon and other fish. I hope you have a good time, but I got to tell you, I'm a little bit jealous.
Hey, Jeff, we need all the representation we can get up here with fishing. I'm really looking forward to it. This is my first time in Alaska. It's absolutely gorgeous in the Anchorage area. You can't look out any window and there's just a view to be had. So really looking forward to it, hoping to catch quite a few. I've been hyping up going to Alaska for quite some time, and the salmon are flowing. So I'm going to be catching hopefully something.
Yeah, well, you will. I'm sure you will. And if you think Anchorage is beautiful, just wait until you get out into real Alaska, as I'm sure everybody outside of Anchorage calls it, real Alaska. So you'll have a great time. Kenai is beautiful. So
I've heard the term the last frontier quite a few times. The last frontier, which is 660,000 square miles of state. So if I just see a small portion of it, I'm going to come back again, I'm sure.
Yep, I'm sure you will. All right. Well, listen, let's talk about it. And I mean, it's a great point. You know, in Alaska, gosh, I mean, it is 6 hours, I think, from Anchorage up to like Mount McKinley, or it's even more up to Fairbanks. I mean, that's a great example of why there shouldn't be a one size fits all for vehicles. Like, that's just not practical. You talk about electric vehicles and how they react to the cold, let's say in Fairbanks, Alaska in the winter when it's 20 or 30 or sometimes 40 below zero. I mean, this is why we try and allow people to have choices rather than have government mandates. But let me just ask you, what type of vehicles will be affected by these new standards?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's going to be everyday vehicles, your Toyota Corollas, your passenger vehicles like Camrys, I'll do domestic, Ford Focus. It's going to be just about every vehicle. So light duty, think of it as your just your regular everyday cars, commuter passenger vehicles. You're also talking the smaller SUVs. You're going to talk full size SUVs. There's also a heavy duty rule that's going to be implemented as well, and that deals with semi tractor trailers. And really, what they're trying to do is they're trying by the year it's going to be implemented in 2027, but by the year 2032, under the current rule, this will have to be almost 56% of all new vehicles sold by 2032 will need to be all electric.
And what can be changed? How can this be changed? I mean, just can a new administration come in and change this and eliminate this whole standard?
Yeah, so partly you need to see what happens in November. November is a very key arena for any of these policies. If that were to occur, it could be reversed by the next administration. It is just a rule. It's not an act of Congress. Congress could also come in and say, hey, we don't like this rule and reverse it. Additionally, Biden and Harris can also come in and say, hey, this is going to decimate our domestic manufacturing of automobiles, so we should probably reverse this. There's a real spirit and goal from this administration to go after traditional energy, oil, gas, any natural gas, LNG. You've seen this from the day one. The Biden administration came out January 2021. Keystone XL pipeline was put away. Speaking of Alaska, Alaska has just been absolutely hammered recently. They've stopped new leases up in the National Petroleum Reserve. ANWR's all but been locked out, and that's for indigenous populations. There's 230 plus indigenous populations here in the state of Alaska, and when you're talking about people just trying to go to work, go to the hospital, maybe they need to go see a doctor, they want to take their kids to soccer. This tailpipe emissions rule and this mandate, this EV mandate, will have a detrimental effect on everyday Americans' freedoms. And interestingly enough, I've been reading books on the war for independence, and we went to war over a small tax on tea, and now we're looking at the bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. trying to hammer us with EV mandates and high inflation and Bidenomics, et cetera.
Yeah, and look, I not only is it taking away choices, but it is costing citizens more, right? When you're driving these standards, I mean, these things make vehicles cost more, and that has a disproportionate impact on the people who can least afford it, right? The people who are working poor, barely making ends meet. Those are the folks that are going to have to really pay under this new standard, right?
That's right. Partly you have to think about it this way. Most people don't live in the city in the United States. The United States is traditionally a very rural country. In fact, in DC, if you go 20 miles outside of DC, you're going to be in farm country. There's not going to be much around. So partly what we need to do is when we're talking about policies that are forcing people into, frankly, a novel technology, electric vehicles are a very cool technology. They go fast. They have some have quite an extended range. But part of the thing is we don't want to ostracize the least vulnerable amongst us. Any policy from Congress or Washington, D.C. should be focusing on people that are most vulnerable to those policies. And when you raise energy and you raise the cost of cars and just you make barriers into market entry for, say, a college student that needs, they're just got their first job. Oh, can't find a car. Right now, as of June, the average transaction price, according to Cox Automotive, was over $48,000. The average interest rate on a used car is over 10%. You're talking between 6 and 8% for new vehicles. And with these monthly auto payments also going up, it really severely impacts families. And we need to be really cognizant, policymakers, need to be very cognizant of when they start enacting policies that they don't damage economic opportunity for families, business, not only that, but we're talking about our communities in the United States. We're not talking about other countries. We're talking about our communities. And these policies are very detrimental to, again,
Yeah.
the most vulnerable amongst us.
Matt, that to me, that's the thing that we have to make sure people connect the dots here. The reason, first of all, the reason we're having inflation, right, is because the government spends too much money. But then in addition, even gas powered vehicles are getting more expensive, in large part, because the federal government is putting increasing mandates on those vehicles, even gas powered vehicles, for fuel efficiency standards, things like that. And it's driving the cost up to a place where it's just not even affordable for people to have a car anymore. And, that's, again, maybe that's okay if you live a couple of blocks from where you work in an urban environment. But I can tell you, I live in Colorado. I own property that's an hour, 45 minutes away. It's over dirt roads. It's, we've got cattle that are down there that we need to get fed. These are different lives that people lead in America, and we need to let them make those decisions rather than having government make those decisions. Your thoughts?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Jeff. One of the things we have to think about is if you're a rancher that is maybe running a fleet of vehicles and you need a new truck, not naming names, there's a new truck that's out there, the number one bestseller for the last 45 years, and also a very profitable entry for one of our domestic auto manufacturers. If you need a new one of those and it's all electric, and electric's the only choice that you have for a vehicle like that, you're going to be pretty short trying to round up your cattle. Or if you have a 300-mile round trip just to go in and get feed and hay, get your tackle, anything that you need from town, and that thing shuts off because it's overheating or it's too cold or anything like that, that's just not feasible. And partly the government really, I think, has a very urban centric, or at least this administration, the Biden-Harris administration, has a very urban centric policy mindset. They're thinking of people that live in apartments, maybe live at a home. But then you talk about the lack of charging infrastructure. You have range anxiety among people who are, even if they would like an electric vehicle, they can't because they're not sure. Like you're saying, hey, I've got to go 150 miles. Am I actually going to make it? You know what else happens in this country is, the weather. Up here in Alaska, it's going to get very cold. In Colorado, where you're at, it's going to get very cold. My home state of Idaho, it gets very cold during the winter. Now, as technology improves, those things will change over time. They will be able to actually maybe come up with a battery that has 1,000-mile range or 2,000-mile range. And we want to praise those advances in technology. But the other thing we can't forget about is how efficient the internal combustion engine has become. If you look at some of the leading diesel engines in lighter trucks, we're talking the half ton or 3/4 ton. Some of them are 4-cylinder, 6-cylinder engines that are turbocharged. They have a light displacement. They get 30 miles to the gallon. I won't name manufacturers, but one of them does about 300 horsepower and 500 foot-pounds of torque, and it also gets 30 miles to the gallon. That kind of technology is utterly incredible. When you look just 20 years ago, when you had the 6.7 diesels, the 7.4 diesels, all these massive diesels, you maybe got 10 to 15 miles to the gallon. But we're talking the advancements in the internal combustion engine are really reaching a zenith where that technology is reliable, it's affordable, it keeps the average price of the vehicle down, it keeps people in their vehicles. When you force them into an electric vehicle standard with a new technology that has not been proven out, has reliability issues, and also, I just flew up here to Alaska. What's one of the first things when you check a bag into the airport? They say, "Do you have any lithium-ion batteries in your bag?" Here we're taking these vehicles that have these massive battery packs and we're sticking them in people's homes when we possibly haven't fully explored what does this actually mean in an apartment setting, in a home setting, in a business setting. Sadly, in South Korea, there's initial reports coming out that one of these electric vehicles burned up, and it burned an additional 140 other vehicles. It's got a lot of people kind of going stir crazy in South Korea, excuse me. But really, there's a lot of questions that we need to work out before we start implementing any of these additional standards. And it ignores the inputs and outputs of the marketplace. The consumer marketplace is the best place to determine the value of the consumer, period.
Well, and as you're talking, some of the gas driven engines the internal combustion engines that you're talking about, a lot of that technology was driven by the market, right? Because people wanted a more fuel efficient truck or vehicle with more torque and with more power. So those things are done because the market has been calling for those, not because there was some government standard that said we needed more torque in a vehicle with better gas mileage. It wasn't the government that did that. It was the consumer who was driving that, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And going back to our example of a small business owner or rancher or just anybody that's in business in general, if they have a fleet of vehicles and half of them are electric and they need to charge a portion of them during the day, but they need to be up and running during the night, but it's like, oh, sorry, the charging period takes 12 hours. That's just not feasible. And what's happening with the general automotive industry right now is they're still making profits off of the vehicles with the internal combustion engine, while at the same time making massive losses on their electric segment. And so when the consumer looks at these different things, the consumer is the smartest person in the room when it comes to what they need. They know exactly how far they need to go, what kind of vehicle they need. And the choices with the internal combustion engine and traditional energy is that if you need a small vehicle, there's one there for you. So they will get 40 to 50 miles per gallon. If you need a full-size truck that can pull 25,000 pounds and still get a moderately decent amount of fuel economy, you have that wide range. When you start forcing these standards on the auto manufacturers, what you have happen is they start pulling products from choice goes out the window. These mandates, choice goes out the window. What you're starting to see Ford 4 years ago got out of the sedan segment. We no longer see the Ford Fusion out there anymore. Not naming names, but Toyota is highly dominant in the hybrid marketplace. Nissan is also considering getting out of the sedan segment. What does that do to the entry of certain consumers into that marketplace? It limits their choices. And so when the electric vehicles on average are well above $50,000 in terms of their transaction price, some are coming down. There are segments where they are coming down, but traditionally those EVs are still very high priced. You have high inflation environment. You have high interest rates, and the consumer doesn't have any choice, not only in their reliability or affordability. They're being priced out of this segment wholesale, and we're still 7 years from this mandate occurring, and we're starting to see manufacturers pull back.
Yeah. Well, and look, I get angry when I think about it, because I think about my kids and whether they'll be able to even afford a vehicle. And there's times when I wonder if that isn't the grand scheme here, is just to get us all into living, a block and a half from where we work, and taking away kind of liberty and freedom. And, I just wonder how in the world, if a car costs $50,000, I'm not willing to pay $50,000 for a new car. So I go find a used car that's got 70,000 miles or whatever on it. That's what I do. How in the world could my kids, who don't make as much money as me, or maybe even someday my grandkids, how in the world are they going to do this? Or people who are the working poor, who frankly the Biden-Harris administration claims that they care about these people. We need to make sure people are connected to the fact that these decisions are being made for them by government, and it's taking away their choice, in many cases, their ability to even buy a vehicle.
Yeah, between all the different rules that are coming down from the Biden-Harris administration, really one of the questions we have to ask ourselves, do we want to pass the same standard of excellent living that many of us have enjoyed here in the United States to our children and grandchildren? That's a really hard question. Most Americans, when they go to turn on the light, they expect that's going to come on. When they go to their car, they expect that there's going to be gasoline that's available for them to move to and fro between their business or their school. Additionally, we have to think about, the most vulnerable amongst us. What about the seniors that rely on, here in Alaska, most of these communities are very rural. There's other communities that are very rural. They depend on natural gas heated systems to keep the lights on, or maybe as backup energy. And so for your children and grandchildren, the question that policymakers and Americans as a whole need to ask is, do we want to pass on the empire of energy that we have built over the last 100 years as the United States, one of the leading exporters of energy in the world that has dominated every single aspect of any nook and cranny between gasoline, automobiles, diesel, LNG. Do we want to keep that same standard of living for our children and grandchildren? And what that does is that builds wealth for us, and it builds wealth for our children and grandchildren. And if we want to squander that wealth on ideas about electric vehicles that was built out in some lab somewhere, or somebody's great college thesis paper that talks about how, hey, we can all live a block and a half from each other and all work at the coffee shop and drive our electric bike and scooters around. That's not realistic. What is realistic is that we have under our feet the energy and natural resources to power the next 100 years in the face of any opposition of any other foreign country, and to do it in an environmentally sustainable way, and frankly, an environmentally leadership way. And we can also keep the lights on. We can excel our standard of living. And so when your children and grandchildren go to expect that same standard of living, that is built on an empire of energy that the United States has led on. And when you look at other countries, they are very amenable to us because we supply a lot of the energy around the world. But I just have to say that if we expect our standard of living to remain the same, we have to pay for it. And part of that is extracting things from the ground, processing natural minerals. It's building the products that we need to have the lifestyle we expect, especially in rural areas. And we haven't even talked about it, but agriculture depends very much largely on our ability to continually provide reliable, affordable energy. And if we want the same, again, the food systems depend very much on energy being affordable and reliable. That's a very key and important component to this country.
Yeah. Well, and again, it gets frustrating because these are decisions that are being made in Washington, D.C., and they're not taking into account. Again, if you want to live a block and a half from where you work, that's great. More power to you. You go do it. But not everybody wants to do that or can do it, right? I mean, people in rural areas can't. They can't live like that. They don't live like that. So we need to we need to focus on giving people choice so that they can do things differently and live different lives. Let's talk about these standards. What are the new standards?
So there's a couple different standards. One deals with model year 2027 through 2032. And what that means is those are any new vehicle built in 2027 will have to have certain standards. And like you spoke, the government previously mandated things like passenger avoidance collision systems. Those have to be standard. They mandated that keyless entry be an option in vehicles. And each of these incremental things kind of adds to the cost of the vehicle. Now, it's not that people don't want to have those in there, but choice is being kind of tailored down. Now, these standards that have, I'll speak to two. One deals with tailpipe emissions, and that deals with particulate matter, like little tiny particles of matter that are coming out of the tailpipe. And what the EPA is doing is between 2027 and 2032, they're making it so stringent that basically by 2032, 56% of all vehicles on the road will need to be electric. And that's where you get your EV mandate. The other one deals with semi-tractor trailers or trucks, basically. And it's more or less the same thing. It's making a very stringent transition in what can come out of your exhaust pipe. When we're talking about tailpipe, we're talking about our just exhaust. And these standards up into 2032 are going to become so stringent that the effort really is to move in the next 7 years. It's almost 2025. In the next 7 years, the effort really is to just move everything over to electric. That doesn't consider the grid. That doesn't consider what the consumer wants. That doesn't consider what local counties want or what local governments want or what do the states want to do perhaps about some of these transitions. The other one deals with the corporate average fuel economy standard. By 2031, all the average across a manufacturer's fleet is going to have to be 50.4 miles per gallon. And it's a double whammy, frankly. Because what happens is if a manufacturer doles out their average fuel economy across all of their vehicles, and some of them don't meet that standard, or say they don't meet some arbitrary standard from a bureaucrat in DC, they're going to start paying a penalty. And without naming names, one of our domestic manufacturers paid several tens of millions of dollars recently because they didn't meet standards from what is called CAFE standards, or corporate average fuel economy standards. So those are the two standards that go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, and who pays that at the end of the day? If an auto manufacturer pays that, who pays it at the end of the day? It's the consumer.
It goes to the consumer. So this is why between the Biden-Harris administration that have literally outprinted any other president in the history of the United States, money-wise, the Federal Reserve, this inflationary pressure from spendthrift Congress is really doubling down on the consumer. And so when the government comes in and says, hey, cars need to be X amount miles per gallon, they need to be this type of mode of transportation, this form of energy transportation. We're talking either gas, electric, hybrid. Oh, and also it needs to have all these safety systems in it. Oh, and it needs to have this kind of color on it. There's all sorts of things that are you would think would be crazy to think about. But every time the government steps in and goes, hey, we need to mandate this, regardless of the consumer ends up paying for it. It's like you buying a house and you say, well, it'd be really nice if I had 2 or 3 bedrooms. And the government comes in and says, well, you only need 1 bedroom. Why don't we make one of your other bedrooms? We'll let it outside and we'll turn it into a solar panel room. You need a solar panel room. The ridiculousness of that example is basically what the government is doing in the consumer auto vehicle segment by pushing people to electric on a technology that is, again, still novel, still new. It is drastically increasing the price. And within this year, we have set records on the average length of a vehicle. Right now, the average length of a vehicle's age is 12.6 years. So not only are people keeping their cars longer, but they can't afford to buy a new car if something happens to it.
Yeah.
And the average transaction price, again, according to Cox Automotive, as of June, was about $48,000. And I don't know about you, but that is astronomical. The last time I purchased a car, I was in the teens, and that was a lot,
Right.
And partly when consumers are going to look at those new models and they go, wow, these are really nice, but boy, I can't afford this. We also have to talk about their monthly expenditures. And one of the impacts of inflation is it really eats into a monthly budget. Americans are paying about $12,000 more a year to live. And that's $1,000 a month. There's your auto payment right there. So it really, the government mandates are pushing people out of affordability. Frankly, it's impoverishing people.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. It's taking away their choices, it's impoverishing them, and it's forcing them into living a life that the government wants them to live rather than the one that they individually choose to live. And these are the frustrating things about this. Talk about the sales, like what are the sales between electric and gas vehicles now?
So right now, the electric vehicles are in the single digits. They're about 8 to 9%. They've done pretty well up to about last year, and then some of those sales tapered off. However, Americans strongly prefer traditional internal combustion engines. And when we're talking about the internal combustion engine, we're not just talking the Model T. We're talking about engines that have start-stop technology. They've got a lot of these systems that if the consumer wants, they can bring it to bear and have a higher efficiency vehicle. But many of these sales that the electric vehicles are pushing in are with a $7,500 tax credit from yours truly, the taxpayer.
Right.
And without those particular incentives in place, that doesn't also consider the charging infrastructure that has to go in. So if you have a particular EV, you can plug it into an outlet. Maybe it's a 120 or 240 volt that can charge it overnight, and that'll work for some people. But for people that are moving about quite a bit, they need a vehicle that can charge quickly. That charging infrastructure in some cases can be several $1,000s more. And so when you're talking about sales wise, they're in the single digits. They're kind of going up and down, but we've also seen several bankruptcies from a lot of these pop-up manufacturers The sales have remained fairly steady, but we saw one German auto manufacturer that is completely reversing their EV plan. They were going to basically have their whole fleet go EV. The one of the big three also, they had a goal by 2030. They were going to have basically an all electric fleet. In the meantime, though, what they've seen is they've had to take billions of dollars in losses over the last couple of years on these electric vehicles. The sales have not gone where the Biden-Harris administration wants them to. And so their answer to this whole thing is, well, we'll just force them on everybody. And what you're going to do is these big three still have to operate with market dynamics. They still have to operate with profitability. And guess what's profitable right now? Very profitable for them. That is keeping the EV segment afloat, and that is the internal combustion engine. Their segments of the internal combustion engine are keeping those sales up. But for you to shift the market where 93% of sales are on the internal combustion engine right now, to by 2032, to have almost 60% of the market shift over to electric vehicles, that is a disaster waiting to happen. You will utterly destroy the transportation of industry of this country.
Yeah. And again, this is government literally taking your choice away about what kind of car you want to drive, forcing you to, buy something. I mean, if you like shopping at Walmart, this is the government coming in saying, no, you can't shop at Walmart. We need you to shop at Target. This is so wrong. And we're seeing the government do this more and more. And again, as you said, now $48,000, the average price of a vehicle. So this waitress who's working very hard to make ends meet, now if she wants to buy a new car, has to pay $48,000 for a car, much increased. And she's also got to pay her taxes to pay the subsidy for the electric vehicle that's somebody else's. So she's got to pay $7,500 for somebody else's car too.
Yeah, it's really a double whammy. And these are again, the policy should be geared towards not doing harm against the most vulnerable. We have all worked in those jobs where it's either been in a restaurant, the service industry, you've worked a janitorial job, or you've worked in you've worked in a job you were starting out somewhere. And when you're looking at the new auto market where average transaction price is $48,000, well, guess what? The used car market is also very, very high right now. I don't have the numbers for the used cars market, but just go on Marketplace or go on any of the trading platforms that sell cars, and you'll see vehicles on there, diesel trucks, 150,000 miles, $30,000, and that's not even talking about the wear and tear on there. Right. But when you're starting out, these policies cannot endanger the most vulnerable people, and that doesn't include that. That's not just young people. That's seniors. That's anybody with medical disability where they can't work. They're not 100% able-bodied. And so when you price these vehicles out, we're literally losing the one major thing that makes us American. That's cars and roads and views. That's and freedom. I mean, that's one of the most basic American things. Yeah. And so in the case of the electric vehicle, there might come a point where, your car breaks down. You go to the auto dealership, and what are your choices? Oh, well, we have this electric truck for $75,000. Oh, we have this electric car over here. It's on sale for $48,000. Oh, and then we have this little bike here for $5,000. And we're not considering that might not meet the needs of different people. That waitress, or it could be a young family that's looking for that first car. They're looking to upgrade from their college car. They're, hey, let's look at a minivan. Oh, well, guess what? The minivan segment has drastically increased in price as well. And so we're pricing people out of affordable vehicles. It's a loss of mobility. It's a loss of liberty. It's a loss of freedom. And it's also driving economic decisions into perverse places. For example, I can't get a vehicle, so then therefore I can't get to my job. And then if therefore I can't get to my vehicle and then get to my doctor, I can't stay healthy. It impacts the most basic portions of being human. And that is to be able to freely move, at least in most cases. Now, if you live in an urban area, that's one thing. There's different modes of transportation. But again, most people live in rural areas. And so that consumer choice is very important, that we maintain that. And the rules like the tailpipe emission rule, the CAFE standards are a double whammy. They nail the consumer. And what we don't want to see is in just a few years, some of these auto manufacturers just go, hey, here's one choice. Here's one choice you have. It's a car. That's it. Oh, well, I'm a farmer. I need a truck. Oh, sorry, we don't sell those anymore.
Right.
And there is one big three that right now they have one model. They're selling one vehicle. That's it. And we if we want to keep the big three around, want to keep American manufacturing around, we have to let the consumer make these choices for themselves.
That's right. That's right. And they're going to make different choices, varied choices, and we're going to have automakers who are making many different kinds of cars and giving us those choices if we allow them to and keep government out of the mix. Let's talk about the grid, though, too. We've seen when it gets extremely cold or extremely hot, the electric grid in the United States, frankly, has an issue keeping up with demands. Is our electric grid even set up to handle adding more electric vehicles to the system?
That's a great question, Jeff. We are a long ways from the utopian dream of the central planners in DC in 2032, where everyone's driving electric cars in the current state of our grid. Thankfully, there has been some bipartisan efforts to increase the capacity of nuclear energy. That both sides seem to want to expand the baseload capability of that particular energy. But here's the problem: is we have older power systems, transmission systems all across the country, and anytime you try to get any of those corridors for new transmission systems set up, there's litigation. There's all these protests, all these different things that stand in the way of these corridors. And again, the United States is one of the leading conservation countries. It's also one of the leading environmentally responsible countries when it comes to how these are handled. And sadly, we have not kept up. The grid is in a space where we're topping out out west in California. Every summer, there's either a fire that's threatening the system there. There could be brownouts, blackouts. And again, these brownouts and blackouts impact people that are most vulnerable. They impact people that perhaps cannot afford to just fly away to some other portion of the country to get away from those problems. When you add electric vehicles to the mix, when you add thousands, if not millions of additional vehicles to the grid that is not set up to handle that peak demand, and you're putting intermittent power systems in there, we're talking solar and wind. When you put intermittent power systems, that's again another recipe for disaster. And the central planners cannot adequately plan for those different variations. And so there could be a real massive impact if the United States shifts its entire electric grid system to go power a bunch of EVs. Meanwhile, your house doesn't, your AC, you can't turn your AC on, or you can't turn certain lights on.
Right.
So yeah, it could be a real disaster if we don't change course on how we treat our grid.
Let's talk about the CARS Act. The House of Representatives, U.S. House, has passed the CARS Act, but it hasn't been taken up in the Senate. If this bill were to pass, what would it do?
So a couple things. California enjoys a status with the EPA to set higher standards under the Clean Air, or under different I'll keep it short, under different environmental laws, basically, when it deals with cars. Mm-hmm. And California right now has dictated that they're going to eliminate the sale of the internal combustion engine in their state by 2035. Well, guess what? California is a massive state. They have trillions of dollars in GDP. So when they try to go do something, it impacts the rest of the country. And so what the Choice in Automobile Retail Sales Act does is, and it led by Tim Walberg of Michigan, naturally, what that does is that'll keep the EPA from just picking winners and losers when it comes to who's more environmentally responsible. Let the states have their equal representation when it comes to these different standards. The other thing is it reverses some of the new tailpipe emission laws that are on the books, or that the Biden-Harris administration are trying to get up and going. That's their light duty, medium duty, heavy duty. more or less, it reverses the rule that would eliminate the internal combustion engine, it would reverse the EV mandate, and it would give us more ability to keep the consumer from having choice taken away from them, and frankly, reliability.
Yeah. Then the House already passed that, right?
Yeah. So the House passed that in this Congress. The Senate has not taken it up. One of the hurdles that you have is that the president would also have to sign off on this, and if the president were to sign off on this, it'd be highly doubt it. November is going to dictate a lot of things for this country, what we prioritize. At the end of the day, if we expect the same standard of living, what the CARS Act does is keep the consumer in the driver's seat. It allows the consumer to continue to choose. If they want the internal combustion engine, they want an electric vehicle. We want the ability for all these technologies to flourish, for those efficiencies found in the internal combustion engine to continue to flourish, for new technologies on the horizon for electric vehicles to flourish. And this is not unlike the early 1900s when the United States there were steam-powered vehicles, there were electric vehicles, there was diesel, there was all these different things that were out there. And over time, we found very efficient means through traditional energies to maintain our standard of living. So the CARS Act really is a key component. If it were to pass the Senate, be signed by the president, it would be very, very important for the consumer in keeping choice.
Well, and it would allow the Congress of the United States and the elected representatives to decide what the policy is for America, rather than a bunch of bureaucrats at the EPA who are unaccountable. That the president decides to tell them that they're going to get to do this. So.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. What you have is a lot of central planners who want to really dictate what the personal life of every American looks like. Well, guess what? That's been tried before and it failed. And partly what we need to look at is Congress will have additional tools, but perhaps in the future, to hold these bureaucrats accountable, to not only review these rules. One of the strong bills that I have worked with my colleagues on is called the REINS Act. And that requires any major rule that has $100 million or more of impact to go before the Congress, to have these agencies come before the germane committee to actually justify it. Hey, EPA, why do we need to have 56% of vehicles by 2032 be all electric? Why do you want to have college students who want to travel across the country, maybe see different things or pursue their education somewhere else, be stranded because they can't afford a new vehicle? Or why do we want to leave grandma at home where she can't get to the doctor because her car is broken down and a new vehicle is going to cost her entire estate and fortune? Those are the kind of things that we want to keep in touch with as policymakers. And the REINS Act is one of those ways that you can really kind of rub it in, hold those members accountable, but also the bureaucrats. And hopefully there's additional tools in the future to do that for them.
Yep. Well, Matt, listen, this is great. I appreciate you. I've been wanting to do a show just like this for a long time, talking about these standards, some of the bad decisions that government's making is driving up the cost of automobiles in our country. And I just really appreciate you taking the time and joining us. And don't catch all the fish in Alaska.
Oh, boy. Boy, if all the fish are running my way, I might have to just do that. But Jeff, we're going to miss you. We're definitely going to miss you up here. Hopefully, next go around, the fish will be plentiful for your return to Alaska. But of course, this is a really important issue. I think to all Americans, really raise awareness on the local level and the state level. Your podcast really is a wonderful outlet for these kind of issues. So I am very thankful that you want to talk particulate matter and tailpipe emissions, and anytime, more than happy to come in and update your audience on what's happening on Capitol Hill.
Sounds great. I really appreciate you joining us, Matt.
Thanks so much, Jeff.
You bet. All right. Well, listen, we talk about this at the end of every show. We talk about how liberty and freedom are easily taken for granted. Is this not one of those issues? Liberty and freedom are at stake here. Your ability to drive the kind of vehicle you want, really to live the kind of life that you want to live, is at stake. And government can take it away. Don't take liberty and freedom for granted. Go out there, defend freedom, defend liberty. Call your member of Congress and your United States Senator and tell them to pass the CARS Act. Go out there and do that right now. That's important. Hey, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to American Potential. You may listen to more stories from Americans working every day to expand freedom and opportunity in their communities by visiting AmericanPotential.com.